A quick word before we get into this week's episode.
I was talking to a head of school recently who said, Peter, we've got a strong strategic plan, but every time we try to act on it, things stall. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Big goals are easy to write down, but they often get bogged down in the daily, making it hard to stay strategic. That's why I built the school operating system. It's a framework that helps you align your team and focus your priorities so you can actually execute the plan. We work alongside you to extrapolate a one-year plan from your existing strategic plan, break it into 90-day sprints, and design a much more effective meeting rhythm that moves your team closer to your strategic vision every single day. And that's just the start. We support much more to help you build the operational infrastructure your plan needs to succeed. If you're serious about making traction this year, let's talk. Visit moonshotos.com/SOS. That's MOONSHOTOS.com/SOS to learn more and set up a time to chat about the school operating system.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Independent School Case Study Series. So I'm really excited to have Denise Musselwhite with me here today. She is the Vice Board Chair of the Association of Technology Leaders in Independent Schools. Maybe you know that as Atlas, and formerly the CIO at Trinity Preparatory School in Central Florida. Today, she runs Tech and Thrive, which is an executive and leadership coaching and consultancy. And we're going to talk about characteristics and attributes that are really important for aspiring leaders. But before we get into that, Denise Musselwhite, welcome to the episode.
Thanks, Peter. I'm so glad to be here. Really honored to be in your space and to speak to your audience.
That's great. I appreciate you. Hey, before we get going, I did a little intro here, but why don't you talk a little bit about your backstory and the work that you're doing now? I think that'd be really helpful.
Great. So I am a daughter of immigrants who moved to the U.S. from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic when I was not even thought of. They moved here when they were 13 years old, my parents. And they didn't get to go to college. My dad served in Vietnam. When he came back from Vietnam, he married my mom, and they decided to open a small business, an auto repair shop. And that auto repair shop was named Denise's Service Station after their firstborn. So just a little bit about the kind of pressure I had as a first child to really step it up. But as a result of growing up in my dad and my mom's auto repair shop, I was exposed to hands-on learning my entire adolescent life. And when we moved to Orlando, Florida, which is where Tech and Thrive is headquartered, I was in middle school, and my dad purchased his first computer diagnostic device for cars, because in the mid-'80s, cars needed a computer to read the error codes. And he enlisted yours truly to translate and diagnose those codes for him and his mechanics. So that was my entree into technology, and so against cultural norms in Latino families for girls to be, chilling out in the garage with the dad and the mechanics. But my dad needed my help, and I could do it. Fast forward, I ended up graduating with a degree in technology management systems in the mid-'90s, one of the only women to graduate with that program. And as a result of the experiences that I had in my dad's shop and that education and my personality, I quickly became a technology manager for a very large law firm in Florida, traveling all over the state, helping them to solve complex technology issues when nobody understood what technology meant, especially lawyers. They didn't want to have anything to do with it, and it was my job to help them figure that out. After sleeping on server floors for more times than I can count, because they never shut it down at law firms, it's a 24/7 tech operation, I decided to pursue other avenues and landed in independent schools in 2000 in my first technology director role at Trinity Prep. And I worked there for 22 years, left the role in 2022 as CIO, consulted with schools all over the world as a result of being someone in the space who understood technology from a business perspective, not just from the classroom, and had great success. And as a result of my experiences as a Latina woman technology leader and seeing the opportunities and gaps in leadership development for technically minded people and in independent schools more generally, we tend to, in independent schools, pluck people who are great at what they do and put them in leadership roles because of the skills they have in the classroom or as a technologist or as a, fill in the blank, and don't really spend a lot of time preparing them for leadership. So I thought that there was a space there for me to fill a niche, and I launched Tech and Thrive in 2022, November, after a sabbatical, and it's been a great success. I've served dozens of clients at this point, nearing 50 in less than 2 years, which is, I think, a testament to how passionate I am for the work and how much my clients appreciate the work that I do.
That's amazing. 50 clients in 2 years. That's like that's an impressive trajectory. And, you're working with lots of leaders. You've been working with them, not just in the last 2 years, but over a course of a career in independent schools. One of the things that I'm really interested in right now is helping aspiring leaders understand, like, how do they progress their careers, specifically, especially on the, if they aspire to be ahead, like what are some of the management and the business and entrepreneurial skills that they're going to need to be successful? Like, what are some of the foundational skills that you've identified as you've been working with leaders over, your career in independent schools? I'm really curious about that.
From a foundational perspective, I think a keen self-awareness about who you are as a leader is key, and really being able to articulate what your unique value proposition is to an organization, especially if you have your eyes on a headship, and taking an accounting of where there are gaps in your experience that may hold you back from connecting with individuals that work in schools, right? So depending on where you're coming from, where are the gaps that you need to lean into more? And in order to figure those out, you have to be really self-aware about who you are. And that is hard for people.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, you just don't know, like, oh, I didn't even realize that was a gap. Like, how do you rise that to the top? Like, how do you do that kind of inventory?
So, unique to the way that I coach, I start every single engagement with a 3-dimensional assessment called the CDR, which is a really deep dive into who people are from a personality perspective, what drives them intrinsically, and then what derails them when they're under stress. We start with that, and that accelerates self-awareness in a way that you just can't get from your evaluation from your supervisor or from even a 360, right? You get to see a mirror on yourself, and then we align that to what it is that you want to move the needle on in terms of outcomes professionally, and we set goals. So I'm a very data-informed coach. I like to use data to help people move the needle in areas where they really need to grow. And I think that's because most of my clients lean analytical, and they really appreciate that.
So let's say somebody, one of your clients said, look, I really want this leadership role, whatever the leadership role is. Like, it could be assistant director, CIO, head of school, whatever the case may be. And you say, okay, like, this is cool. Like, we now have this profile of you. We know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, the gaps, so to speak. What would be some strategies? Like, if you were going to set goals, like, what would an example of a goal be that somebody could work to? Like, and maybe you could paint the picture from the perspective of a specific role looking to achieve another specific role.
Yeah. I can talk about someone who's coming to the headship from a non-academic track, right? So let's think about all those roles that are non-academic. An admissions director, maybe a CFO, a CIO, an investment director who maybe didn't get to teach in the classroom, right? Let's talk about somebody like that, because that's the most challenging shift. First, we have to really assess whether the person is made for leadership. So the assessment actually has a scale to find out whether the person is made for leadership. There is a leadership energy category. And if that person isn't personality-wise made to lead intrinsically, they're going to have to address that. Because in a head's role, leadership acumen is key. And leadership acumen means setting aside your own interests for the organization and being clear about what the organization's outcomes are. Not everybody can...
Setting the vision, right?
Setting the vision casting, relationship building, self-promotion. There's a lot of parts of this job that have nothing to do with sitting behind your desk alone. It's a very forward-facing role.
Right. It's a CEO role.
It's a CEO role. So if you are someone who lacks interpersonal acumen or is very numbers-driven, this is going to be a huge stretch for you. And it's going to deplete your energy because you're taking yourself out of your normal disposition to do the job. So that's the first thing we do, is kind of set the tone for, this is what you're going to have to do to fit into that place. Are you willing to make the sacrifice to stretch yourself?
Right. And that's where the self-reflection comes into play, right?
And what's the motivator? Some people are motivated because they want a bigger paycheck. Some people are motivated because they want to make a bigger impact, leave a legacy. Other people are motivated by ego. So we get really real about what the motivation is, or a combination of all of that.
It's so important to set that baseline, and whether they're working with you or not. I mean, I think you can get to that assessment in a myriad of ways. If somebody said, okay, like I know where my gaps are, I'm willing to commit to them to take that next step in leadership, and you're in kind of a mid-level administrative role, and you're looking to rise. Maybe it's the head's role, maybe it's to like a one step before that. Like what would an example of setting goals internally to kind of raise your profile and position in a school and kind of start to build that case why you would be a good candidate? Like, how does somebody go about and kind of craft those opportunities if they're not readily accessible?
Well, I think some of the ways that people can push past internal challenges to advancement are to put themselves out there, to gain the experience in ways that are outside of their organization. And I think a lot of people miss that. Like they constantly look at their organization to provide space for them to grow. And that may not be the case because the organization may be already have made a judgment about who you are as a leader, and they're not willing to see you differently. So ways that individuals could do this is by volunteering for volunteer leadership roles on boards at other schools, stepping into a project that they've never done before and leading it in the area in which they need to grow. As an example, if you're nervous about being the forward-facing individual as a head of school, and that's not your normal disposition, then how are you going to practice that before you're a head of school? How are you going to put yourself in front of people in a way that forces you to ask for money? Just think about the things that heads of school have to do, right? So how can you volunteer for opportunities to practice that?
And now a word from our sponsor. Leading a school today can mean juggling a dozen different systems across offices, finance, fundraising, marketing, enrollment, and academics, all pulling your attention in different directions. At Blackbaud, we believe it shouldn't be that way. That's why we built Blackbaud's Total School Solution. It's a fully connected solution designed for private and independent school leaders who want a clear view of their entire operation. From tuition to transcript to donation, you get one ecosystem, one login, and one source of truth. This isn't about more software. It's about smarter strategy. When your systems work together, you spend less time chasing down data and more time leading. Want to see what Blackbaud's Total School Solution could do for your school? Visit blackbaud.com. That's BLACKBAUD.com BAUD.com to learn more.
Can I ask a question maybe from the different side of the lens? Like you just said something that really, I've thought a lot about. I don't know if I have a great answer to. It's, if you're in an institution that's already pegged you as being something, and like you're trying to crack out of that, as the leader of the organization, how do you avoid doing that?
Oh, that's such a good question. So you're asking from the perspective of like the head of the school who wants people to stretch beyond their limits.
That's it, right? Like it's really easy to get painted as X or Y. And you're like, I'm good at those things, but I'm good at these other things too. You're just not seeing it. As the leader who's doing the painting, like how do you make sure you don't do that, right? Like that's always critical.
I see the power in having agendas for meetings that empower people in your organization to talk more than the leader does, and expecting them to show up sometimes, not always, with new and different ideas that haven't been talked about. Some what can be called blue sky thinking, right? And to really allow space in the organization for that kind of generative discussion where action doesn't have to be taken, but ideas are generated outside of the hierarchy of the school, right? How are you as a leader hearing outside of the hierarchy of the school's structures, ideas? How do you provide a vehicle for that? Having been part of an organization through the pandemic, I think that during the pandemic, we flattened the organization. So schools everywhere did this. Organizations everywhere did this. Out of the need to address something that was urgent and out of our control, we flattened our organizations and everybody had a voice because we needed to solve problems quickly and we couldn't get stuck in the decision funnel. We needed to hear from teachers immediately, is this going to work? And we brought them to the table. When the pandemic was over, we missed the opportunity to keep the organization flat that way so that you could hear what could work across the organization from individuals who may not be typically in this hierarchy. So I think that it's called an engage and align hierarchy, right? Where you solve issues based on people's strengths instead of people's roles.
That idea of giving people kind of the generous space to do interesting things and do that blue sky thinking really resonates. I had recorded an earlier episode of this series with Mount Vernon, and they actually plug in that time into everybody's schedule to have that kind of generative space each week in order to do that blue sky thinking, because they strongly believe in innovation and they realize it can't come from just the leadership team, right? It's got to be cultivated across the community. And I think that's like really fascinating to me. Now, I think I could hear the flip side of that, which would be a head said, hey, Denise, like I think it sounds great, but like we don't have enough time in our schedule to be able to do that. Like, how do we do that? And I kind of have some answers in my head, but I'm curious, like, what's your take on that?
Oh my gosh, that time is always the enemy. I think that for the most part, many of the meetings that happen in schools are pretty stale, and that there's a lot of time available for blue sky thinking if we reimagine the way that we meet and why we meet. I often provide resources to clients who really struggle with this lack of time, and they recreate the way that they meet with their executive teams. And they only talk about roadblocks. They celebrate, they talk about roadblocks, and then they blue sky. Period. There's only 3 things, and they do that in 45 minutes, and the meeting is over. Right. So I think that I think schools have a lot of reflection to do about how they're effectively meeting, because there's a lot of ineffective meeting going on.
Yeah. No. And the good news is there are a lot of like really interesting ways to approach meetings that are productive and can be generative, right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's, and I think some heads of school or senior leaders may be fearful of this blue sky thinking because it could lead people into directions that the school isn't ready to tackle. But if the organization has already visioned a strategy or outcomes that it wants to have, the blue sky thinking can be attached to a specific outcome the school wants to make. And then the blue sky, it can be within a boundary of, in this area of, you fill in the blank, we're going to talk and generate ideas on what we could do to move the needle in this area.
Yep. No, I think I love that, especially given the fact that you may identify an outcome that's 3, 4, 5 years out down the road. I can pretty much guarantee that if you've come up with a strategy 5 years in advance of where you want the outcome to be, like, it's probably going to change quite a few times over the course of that 5 years, right? So like that kind of blue sky thinking in order to respond and react to how things are going is really critical.
And the crowdsourcing from the community about what's really the priority, instead of setting a priority with anecdotal evidence, like that to me is the place where magic happens.
Okay, so let's train our thoughts back on. Sorry, I just had to go down that path for a few minutes. I appreciate you indulging me on that one, but I want to bring it back to aspiring leaders, and I think we've hit a little bit on this, but I'm curious if you can put like a finer point on it and talk about some of the common challenges that aspiring leaders face in independent schools, and like I think you've given some ideas around how to navigate them, but maybe there's some other ideas that you have too.
I think that one of the biggest challenges is this sense that they are undervalued or underestimated in their current role. Like, I'm not getting noticed for the good work or ideas I have. Right? That is a persistent theme. Okay. And then also blaming the organization for a lack of growth. So I really try to help clients change the thinking there of one where you're self-advocating and stop waiting for an organization to give you opportunities. What are you going to do to make opportunities for yourself? How are you going to insert yourself?
Right. I love that, because that's the lesson we give students, right? Like you've got to learn how to self-advocate for yourself and create opportunities and all the things associated. Yeah.
In our, I wouldn't say they're contemporary, but schools may or may not have evaluation systems. Interestingly, the evaluation systems that are used to assess good teaching somehow end up being the same evaluation systems that are used to assess good leadership. And they're not the same, right? So that is one kind of misstep I observed, is that it can't be the same thing, because it's not. When we're teaching adolescents in K through 12, ultimately we want them to be leaders when they graduate, right? But we're testing a pedagogy to see if it's working, right? When you're dealing with adults in the organization and you're trying to cultivate high potential future leaders for the organization, because those are the best kind, the ones that already know your space, assessing them the way that you assess teaching isn't correct. So then what is the recipe for an ideal leader in your organization, and how do you define that and hold people accountable to it? Right? So that they can see themselves.
Yeah. It's funny. So I keep coming back to this Mount Vernon episode. They actually talk about leadership competencies that they've identified and made clear to people throughout the school. Like, these are the things that matter to us as a community. And I think that's really helpful to understand. Oh, like, I'm going to work on this one this year, or this one, or these 2 or 3, right?
Yeah. And I think that Mount Vernon's work is, I'm a huge fan, have been a huge fan for a couple, over a decade of the progressive work that they're doing in leadership development in schools, and the competency model that they've created aligns a lot with the Thrive operating system that I created to help the clients that I serve. And I know that, like the model I created and the one that they have, is research-based, data-informed, and it allows people to see themselves and also the organization in the evaluation process, right? Because both parts have to be there. The individual has to be there, and so does the organization's goals. The organization's goals have to be there too. When someone can't see themselves in either place, then it's time for a different conversation.
Yeah. Hey, so let's do a little future thinking here. Like, what are some of the impacts, like trends that you think will impact independent school leaders down the line? And if you're an aspiring leader, what are some of the things that you can do today?
Well, I love this question because I'm like super tapped into leadership development and data about what the trends are for the workplace. And right now we have 5 generations of people co-working together in our schools for the first time ever, which is super complicated. But one of the number one shifts is in relationship skills and interpersonal communication. Because of our reliance on technology, our ability to interface, eye to eye this way, like we are doing, even though we have a computer here in between us, we're making a connection. People's ability to do that is on the downswing, and leadership and the workplace is looking for people who have these soft skills more than they have the technical skills to do the job.
Yeah. Is that a COVID thing, do you think? Or is that something?
I think COVID didn't help. COVID didn't help. And I think that our quick shift to online learning, our accelerated adoption of technology and digital tools has weakened our emotional intelligence and our ability to really understand people. So I think that from a leadership development perspective, relationship skills and interpersonal connectivity is really, really important.
Now, in terms of your career, like, was there a moment that kind of informed your leadership philosophy?
There were a lot of moments because, and I love to tell people about this, and I wrote about it in the leadership book where I contributed a chapter for Atlas that's available. But I think that we all go through like versions, and because I'm a techie, I talk about like versions and upgrades. So at every version, there was something that was pretty significant and critical. The one that I think that could be helpful to your audience is this idea that self-promotion is bad. And, because we work in a space where we're servant leaders and we put others ahead of ourselves, we think it's not good to self-promote. And that, I think, mindset of giving despite, sacrificing yourself holds us back from living into our true potential because we're embarrassed or shamed for promoting the good work that we do or the unique perspective that we bring. This, I think, when I realized that my uniqueness was my strength, everything changed. So at the beginning of my career in independent schools, I was really walking around with a chip on my shoulder because I didn't look like everybody else. No one else in my organization had come from the background that I shared with you. I didn't go to a elite, college or university. I didn't benefit from an independent school education myself, and I had immigrant parents. I was the first person to go to college in my family. I walked around with a chip for a long time because of that, despite the fact that I had more technical acumen, proven technical acumen than almost everyone I was in the room with. Fast forward 15 years, and I understood that uniqueness is what actually helped me succeed. My ability to move past obstacles and be incredibly resilient because I came from an immigrant family. Like no challenge was too big for me. My ability to speak up because my parents gave me the authority to do that at a really young age. My ability to translate technical concepts. All of these things were my superpowers, and I kept them a secret. So when I realized that the uniqueness was the superpower, everything changed.
That resonates so deeply. I mean, I know I put a lot of stuff out there, but it is really hard for me to do it. It's like, because I'm always like, oh God, is this the one where, people are gonna be like, oh, that's ridiculous or whatever. Like, it's just hard. It's hard. The self-promotion thing is, I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a tough hill to climb sometimes.
And I like to rename it. It's self-advocacy because people like you need to hear from you. Right? So it's an advocacy of your experience, your stories that really changes the perspective for someone else. And when I started speaking at major conferences, I thought the difference that I was making was in technology. But the difference I was making was because I was a woman speaking on technology in front of other women who felt isolated in that space, or other people of color who didn't see themselves. I didn't know that, 20 years ago when I started speaking at NAIS, I didn't recognize it. I thought I was impressing people with my technical acumen, and I was, but I also was so unique.
Yeah. Right. I mean, 100%. Absolutely.
And something that I was trying to hide. I was trying to not be unique. Like, I just want to fit in. I just want to be like everybody else. I just want to, no, not anymore. But that takes a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness and support.
Yeah. I've had so many conversations with folks who, are in their 40s, 50s, what have you, and just the amount of self-reflection that they've done during that period. Like, it feels like I've had the same conversation over and over again, and kind of, I really appreciate those conversations because, like, when I was 20s, 30s, there wasn't a heck of a lot of self-reflection happening, I don't think, right? I was just kind of plowing forward. But as I've gotten older, boy, like, I spent a lot of time thinking about, how to be the best version of myself and what that means for schools that I work with, for my family and all the things. And I don't know if it's something that you gain, as you age, but I'm really thankful that I've kind of landed in that space. And it just, like, all of my peers seem to have landed in that space too. Like, there's definitely a trend happening there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I hear that.
Yeah. Hey, last question for you. So let me just throw a scenario at you. Like, a younger leader calls you and says, you know what, I know I've got things that I want to do. I'm not sure how to do it. I'm a little confused about where to go next. Like, what advice would you offer that person? It's fantastic. Denise Musselwhite, thank you so much for sharing today. This has just been for me personally, a really fun conversation, something that I'm just increasingly passionate about. And just to hear your expertise has been fantastic. So thank you again.
Thanks, Peter. This has been so much fun. You and I could go on for a long time talking about this stuff. We're
100%.
But this has been awesome. I hope that your audience appreciates it. And, this can be a little bit of an echo chamber. So if somebody's listened to this and it's made a difference, shoot me an email. Yeah. Send me something on LinkedIn. Let me know that it mattered.
I was actually going to ask, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at my website, which is techthrive.me, and shoot me a note. Let me know if this made a difference.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, and I'm sure we'll talk about this again in the future.